Hello, BookTube. I'm Peg, the Book Prize Addict, and I am in Book Prize Addict heaven. As I mentioned in my last video, March is just filled with wonderful book prizes coming out. The Republic of Consciousness shortlist, which I've read all the long lists this year, is going to be announced tomorrow, and then Monday is the much awaited Women's Prize long list. We've had several people give their guesses for that. It's been fun to follow that, so I know you all are anxious to see that. I'm kind of trying to talk about the prizes that are interesting, but that other people aren't talking about so much. So today I want to be talking about an Australian, one of the main Australian prizes. It's the New South Wales Literary Awards, and it's sponsored by the New South Wales government. And I'm giving you a link, but it's a link that talks about the books that are up for the award rather than the New South Wales NSW, they call it, website itself, because they have a lot of other things about the government, and it's kind of hard to find the books. But anyway, but I am putting a link to this down below. And anyway, so let's see. Okay, the NSW Awards contains 11 different awards, and it's interesting. Of course, I'll be talking about the novel, the fiction, but they have both a multicultural award and an indigenous award. So I think that's really interesting. Incidentally, if we have some Australian viewers, I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of these. We had Leah. I haven't seen her around. She was a very, very avid and knowledgeable booktuber from Australia, and would give her thoughts on these. So I watch actually several very good Australian booktubers. So please give your thoughts. Let us know if you've read any of these. Okay, let's see. I am dealing with the Christina Stead Prize for Best Novel, and she was an author, an Australian author, and died in 1983. Now, she grew up in Australia, but she later moved, I think, to the U.S. and maybe also London for a while, but she always kept really in contact and supported Australian literature. So this has been named for her. Her most important novel was called The Man Who Loved Children. I've heard of that, and it was about her childhood in Sydney. Okay, so let's see. One thing I want to say, I have 6 books to talk about that are on their short list. 3 of them I've actually read and were up for awards last summer. Now, this is why it's hard for we book prize people to keep track, because different book prizes have different windows that they look at of when books were published. So the first 3 of these won awards last summer, and they're still up for the award. In other words, the window for this one is probably all of 2018, whereas the cutoff point was before that for the other prices. Okay, don't worry about it. I'll let you know if it's eligible or not. Okay, so anyway, the first 3 are easy to obtain here in the U.S. at least, and have been talked about quite a bit. So I'll just go over them quickly. The first one is The Life to Come by Michelle de Kertzer, and this was talked about a lot. In fact, it won the Miles Franklin Literary Award in Australia last summer. That's the other and probably the major award for best novel there. So it actually it has 5 different stories or long chapters, each from a different narrator's point of view. It's kind of somewhat linked by Pippa, a writer who's not a real great writer, and her thoughts on it. And some of the stories, most of them take place in Australia, but there's also one in Sri Lanka, and I believe one in Paris. And it deals with a complex portrait of loneliness, ways we pretend, and needs we don't articulate. seemed to me like this had mixed reviews, at least from some of the booktubers. So let me know if you reviewed this or had some thoughts on it, or what you thought about it. I've kind of forgotten on who liked what. Anyway, so okay, the next one. I love this book. It's called Border Districts by Gerald Nermain. He is an older author and is in Australia and is getting a lot more attention just recently. So quite a few of his backlists has been published. And this one in particular, you could almost say was some sort of autofiction. When after he retired, he moved back to an area where he had lived previously, and it has a lot to do with memory, how you remember things when you go back to places that you saw many years ago and they've changed, but yet you can still picture how they were and they bring back feelings. And I love this book, and I was wondering how I was going to talk about it, and just this morning Eric Carl Anderson made a video on books, I guess, that he's read, and he gave a wonderful talk on this book, and he liked it too. So I encourage you to, if you haven't already, and I'm sure you can find him, to look at Eric's thoughts on this book. He did a great job, as always. Okay, the next one we have, which was also in several prizes last year, so it must have been written early in 2018, is Tim Winton, The Shepherd's Hut. Tim Winton is a very, very well-known author everywhere, but I guess especially in Australia. And again, I seem to remember when I talked about this before, somebody from Australia mentioned that there's mixed feelings about him there. I don't know. Let me know. I'm counting on you guys to put some info in here. Anyway, but I loved this book when I read it. And in fact, did deal with an actual shepherd's hut. I had no idea what that was, but when shepherds are out in the outback, they have to live somewhere as they follow their herds around, and it's like a little small tiny house on wheels that they cart around, kind of like what we now, there's a thing in the US anyway on actually living in tiny houses, and there's a lot of videos on those. Interesting. But this actually dealt mainly with a young man who needs to cross the salt flats, and he runs into this shepherd. And I loved the imagery in it, and I loved it a lot. I thought it was a great book. Now I wish I could just find it. I actually do have it, but I couldn't find it for this. Okay, so next we're getting into the three that I had not even heard of before, and in many cases they're not available yet, at least on in the U.S. So I'd love especially to hear about if any of you people in Australia have read them or know anything about them. Okay, this is called Man Out of Time, and it deals a lot with really complex imagery, and it talks about the effect of mental illness and depression on a family. I guess there's a husband and wife and a young daughter, and the husband suffers from some sort of mental illness, and he disappears, and it's the talks about the effect on the 9-year-old daughter. This one, I can't remember if it's out here. There's one of these. It might be out here. I can't remember. Okay. Anyway, this one really looks interesting to me. Boy Swallows Universe. Yeah. Okay. This deals with a single parent family in Brisbane. How do you say that? Okay. Anyway, and there's two brothers, and one of the boys actually doesn't talk, but he somehow writes words in the air, and the other brother, I guess, communicates for him, and they have a single mother with some problems of her own. And from what I read in the review, a notorious criminal comes into their life, and whatever ensues from then on. I'd really like to get this one right away, but it's not going to be published till April 2nd here in the U.S. Well, I guess it's only a month away. Why is it flashing? Okay. Anyway, so this actually says it's 500 plus pages, so it's long. Okay, and the last one I have is Everlasting Sunday by Robert Lukens. And I believe it, yeah, I was able to download a Kindle sample of this, so it's already been published here in the U.S. And look at that kind of cold-looking environment. That seems to have something to do with the story because it takes place in England in 1952. I guess that was one of the coldest winters on record. And he talks about a young man who went to a home for troubled boys out in the countryside somewhere, and the mysterious caretaker or the man who was in charge of it really couldn't find out too much about it, but it did sound interesting. Okay, so that's it for the lineup for the NSW Awards. The prize will be announced on, what did I say, end of April 26th, and it's the same day that the women's short list is going to be announced. I mean, they're just overlapping. I keep a calendar of prizes and when they're going to be announced and when the lists are. There's some of them that have 2 and 3 on the same day, enough to keep me busy. Okay, happy reading. Bye.